The dream began with silence. Not the peace of meditation, not the hush that settled over the temple in the hour before dawn, but a terrible silence that made every small sound inside it feel like a wound. Anakin Skywalker stood in a white chamber washed in bloodless light. The walls were so smooth they seemed carved from bone. There were instruments nearby, polished metal arms folded like insects at prayer, and somewhere just beyond the reach of his sight, he could hear the thin, wet cry of a newborn child. Then another. He turned toward the sound with the greedy desperation of a starving man smelling bread. For one impossible, lancing instant joy struck through him so fiercely that the whole dream trembled. The cries were real. They were his. They were hers. He knew that with the certainty dream knowledge carried, with the same terrible conviction that had once told him he was too late to save his mother while he was still half a galaxy away. The room darkened at the edges. Padmé lay on a raised bed beneath the white light, her face damp, her hair clinging in dark strands against her temples. She was trying to smile. Even in the dream, she was trying to make his fear easier for him to bear, and that made the fear unbearable. He stepped toward her and found that the floor had become soft and uneven beneath his boots. Not polished durasteel anymore, but hot sand. Tatooine grit hissed under his soles. The white walls thinned into hanging tent cloth. The newborn cries became the low, broken moans of Shmi Skywalker. His breath locked in his throat. No, he tried to say, but dreams did not care what men refused. His mother's hand was suddenly in his flesh hand, weightless and burning at once. Then it was Padmé's hand. Then it was both. He saw the Tusken hut and the white chamber at the same time. He saw his own shadow thrown across the wall, long and monstrous, and beyond it another shadow with a hooded shape and a patient smile. He could not see the face. He never could, but the smile lingered in the air like poison. "Help me," Padmé whispered. Or maybe it was his mother. Or maybe both women had become one grief, because the Force had finally found the cleanest blade to use against him. He lunged forward, and the room lengthened away. Every step dragged. His metal hand would not close. His flesh hand was slippery with blood. The infant cries faded. Padmé's chest rose once, shallow and shocked, and then there was nothing but a stillness more violent than any scream. He woke with his own voice trapped in his mouth. For a second, he did not know where he was. Darkness hung around him, layered with faint blue city light slipping through the tall windows. The ceiling overhead was polished and high. Silk sheets tangled at his waist. His heart battered against his ribs hard enough to hurt. He could hear the muted thrum of air traffic beyond the transparent steel, the distant pulse of Coruscant, endless and sleepless. A real world. A living world. A world in which Padmé was not dead. He turned, breath sawing in and out of him, and saw her asleep beside him. Moon-pale traffic glow touched one side of her face. One hand had drifted over the curve of her pregnancy during the night, fingers loose, protective even in sleep. The sight struck him so hard that for a moment he had to bow his head. Relief did not feel soft. It came sharp, almost painful, as if his body had forgotten how to receive anything gentle without bracing first for loss. He sat very still, listening. Her breathing was steady. The Force around her moved warm and deep, no rupture in it, no sudden emptiness, no terrible slackening. Yet the echo of the dream clung to him. He could still smell hot sand, still see white light on dying skin. The fear did not leave simply because morning had not yet made it true. That was the cruelty of visions. They colonized the living moment. They poisoned what had not happened by making it feel inevitable. He pushed the heel of his flesh hand against his eyes. This had happened before. Not in detail, not with her face under that light, but with the old familiar cadence of dread. He had dreamed of his mother in pain. He had gone to her. He had found her. And he had been too late. The memory lived in him like a seam of heat and stone, hidden until pressure found it and made it burn again. He had told no one the whole truth of that. Not Obi-Wan. Not the Council. Not Padmé. though she knew enough to understand the shape of the scar. Some wounds were easier to carry when no one looked directly at them. Or so he had taught himself to believe. Beside him, Padmé shifted, her lashes fluttering. "Anakin?" Her voice was soft with sleep. No alarm yet, only concern reaching for him before she had even opened her eyes. He turned toward her too quickly. "I'm sorry. I woke you." She opened her eyes fully then, and sleep vanished from them in an instant because she saw his face. Padmé had always been quicker than most people about that. She knew how to read the damage he tried to hide. Years in the Senate had taught her the 1,000 small deceits of civilized beings, and years loving him had taught her which of his silences were harmless and which were bleeding. "You were dreaming again." It was not a question. He looked away toward the windows. Just the war. Anakin Skywalker. Only his name. No accusation. No pressure. Yet it struck deeper than argument would have. He felt the old instinct to protect her by withholding truth rise in him, automatic as breath. If he named the dream, he made it real. If he spoke the fear aloud, perhaps it would take root. Perhaps the Force itself listened for such things, eager to punish attachment by giving it a voice. He hated the thought even as it crossed his mind. He was a Jedi. He had faced battle droids, assassins, separatist warships, Sith lords. He had cut his way through fire and metal and screaming worlds. Yet there, in the dark beside the woman he loved, honesty felt more dangerous than combat. Padmé levered herself upright with a small effort and reached for his wrist. Her fingers settled over the cold durasteel of his right hand, and the contrast of skin on metal made something inside him tighten. "You don't have to protect me from your thoughts," she said. A bitter half-smile touched his mouth and vanished. "That's exactly what I'm supposed to do." She studied him a moment. "According to the Jedi, or according to you?" He almost answered with something easy. Some small deflection. Some half-joke about rules and councils and the impossible virtue of serenity at 4 in the morning. But he was too tired to perform. The dream had stripped performance from him. "It felt real," he said at last. Her hand tightened. She knew then, or knew enough. He saw it in the way her breathing changed, in the careful stillness that came over her. She had lived too long beside war not to recognize the gravity in those words. "About me?" she asked quietly. He did not speak. She closed her eyes once and opened them again. Fear moved through her, but Padmé did what she had always done with fear. She made room for it without letting it command her. "You've had these before." "Yes." "How long?" He swallowed. "Since we came back. Since the battle over Coruscant. Since he had cut down Count Dooku at Palpatine's urging while the old man watched with bright, hungry satisfaction. Since the Chancellor had praised him afterward with that warm paternal pride that felt, in memory, slightly wrong around the edges. Since the city had celebrated heroes and the war had gone on, and the future had begun whispering to him in a dead woman's voice. Padmé searched his face, and he knew she was tracing all the nights he had said he could not sleep, all the times she had found him on the balcony staring into the traffic lanes, as if calculation alone could wrest order from chaos. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to make you afraid." Her expression changed then, not into anger exactly, but into something sadder and sterner. "I was already afraid. I'm carrying our child in secret during a war while the Chancellor gathers more power every week, and the Senate applauds him for it. Fear isn't the thing your silence saves me from." "No. Our child. Singular, because that was how they spoke of it. Neither of them knew there were two. The Force did, perhaps. The dreams certainly seemed to. But the knowledge had not yet entered the world of scanners and physicians and medical droids. It still belonged to mystery." He bowed his head. "I know." "No?" she said, and lifted his chin until he met her eyes. "You know how to fight. You know how to endure. Sometimes I think you still don't know how to let someone stand beside you in the worst part." He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to tell her he had let Obi-Wan stand beside him through years of war, through impossible missions and impossible victories and losses that felt personal, because every clone under his command had a face, a name, a voice. He wanted to say he had let her stand with him in every way that mattered, but the truth sat between them, simple and humiliating. When fear pierced the deepest places in him, he became 9 years old again, a boy on Tatooine, with no power to save the people he loved. And boys who grew up as slaves learned many things. One of them was that helplessness was easier to survive if no one saw it. Padmé drew his hand to her cheek. "Tell me the dream." So he did. Not every detail. He could not yet speak the part where his mother's face became hers, or the shadow smiling at the edge of his sight. But he told her enough. A chamber. A birth. Pain. Gosh. Her fading. The certainty that he could not reach her in time. As he spoke, he expected her to recoil from the shape of it. Instead, she listened with the grave attention she gave Senate testimony and battlefield reports, as if understanding could itself be an act of defense. When he finished, the city sounded louder. Dawn traffic was thickening somewhere below. A Skylane horn moaned, distant and mournful. Padmé kept hold of him. "Visions are not destiny. They were for my mother." The words came harder than he meant them to. She flinched, not from the force of his voice, but from the old grief inside it. "Anakin," she said, softer now. "I saw her suffer. I knew she needed me. And by the time I got there," his jaw clenched, "I won't do that again." There it was, the vow underneath the fear. Not "I don't want to lose you." Not "I'm afraid." Something fiercer, more dangerous. "I won't allow it." It felt stronger when dressed as determination. It always did. Padmé heard the danger too. He saw it pass through her eyes. She turned his metal hand over and laid his palm against the swell of her belly. "Then don't do it alone." Beneath his hand there was warmth, life, the impossible strangeness of his child existing there in secret, while the city rushed past outside and armies still fought in his name. The Force stirred around that life in quiet spirals. Not fear. Not yet. Only becoming. A chime cut through the room. His comlink, discarded on the side table, flashed with the temple frequency. Duty, punctual, and relentless. Anakin closed his eyes for a beat before reaching for it. Obi-Wan's voice came through, crisp despite the early hour. "Anakin, if you're awake, the Council wants us in the war room within the hour. We've had developments." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Of course the galaxy had developments. The galaxy always did. "I'm on my way," he said. He shut the channel and sat for a moment longer. Padmé leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. The gesture was small, almost nothing, but it steadied him more than a lecture on serenity ever could. "Come back tonight," she murmured. He kissed her. "Not enough. Never enough. I will." As he dressed, the dream lurked at the edges of his mind, patient as a predator in tall grass. Yet another sensation had entered it now, faint but distinct. The memory of her words. "Don't do it alone." He was not ready to obey that yet. But for the first time since the visions had begun, he was no longer certain he wanted to disobey it. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant had been built to suggest permanence. Its great towers rose through the city haze, with an elegance meant to outlast governments, wars, and fashions in power. Once, as a child, Anakin had found comfort in that. The temple had seemed unshakable then, a place where old stone and old wisdom might hold steady against whatever chaos lived inside him. Now, descending toward the landing platforms in his starfighter, he saw more clearly the fractures under the beauty. Too many gunships. Too many clone officers moving through halls once meant for contemplation. Too many war briefings where there should have been teaching in silence and the measured patience of peacetime. The Republic had not only used the Jedi, it had changed them. He landed hard enough to draw a look from a nearby deck officer, killed the engines, and vaulted out before the cockpit seal had fully cycled. The platform smelled of fuel, cold morning air, and the faint medicinal tang that seemed to cling to all wartime facilities no matter how grandly they were built. Clone troopers in blue-marked armor crossed the hangar in tight groups, helmets under their arms, speaking in low, efficient tones. Their faces were identical, but never the same. After enough campaigns, after enough names and casualties and half-finished jokes shared over ration packs, no one who actually looked at clones ever mistook them for copies. Obi-Wan waited near the ramp to the inner corridor, hands folded in his sleeves, expression composed in the way it became, when he was either deeply tired or choosing very carefully not to show he was worried. Anakin knew at once which it was. "You look terrible, Obi-Wan," said by way of greeting. "Good morning to you too. I thought honesty would save time." Obi-Wan's gaze flicked over him. "Did you sleep at all?" Anakin started walking. Obi-Wan fell into step beside him. Their boots clicked over polished stone worn faintly dull by centuries of passage. "A little. That means no. That means enough." Obi-Wan made a small sound that was not agreement. "You've been saying that for 3 days. I've also been winning wars for 3 days. One battle over Coruscant and now you speak like a holodrama." Despite himself, Anakin almost smiled. Obi-Wan's timing with irritation was one of the few constants in the galaxy. They passed beneath a high archway where morning light slanted in bands across the floor. Temple aides moved around them carrying datapads and sealed dispatch tubes. Somewhere deeper in the building, younglings were beginning an early lesson, their voices faint and bright enough to sound like a memory from another life. "You wanted developments," Anakin said. "I did." Obi-Wan's mouth flattened. "The Outer Rim sieges are worsening. Grievous continues to be everywhere we are not. Master Windu thinks he's trying to draw our fleets too thin before a decisive move. Master Yoda thinks he's desperate. Both can be true. Usually are. In war." They turned into a lift. The doors closed, and for a blessed second, the city and the temple both disappeared into quiet metal walls and reflected lamplight. Obi-Wan glanced at him then, more directly than he had in the hangar. "What is it?" Anakin kept his eyes on the doors. "Nothing." Obi-Wan's patience, unlike many Jedi's, was not passive. It had weight. It leaned. It waited until silence itself became an answer. "The Chancellor mentioned you were distracted during the debrief." That pulled Anakin's gaze around at once. "You spoke to Palpatine?" "He spoke at us, more accurately, to the Council after dawn. Congratulated us all on our heroism, praised your rescue of him in particular, and attempted to make it sound as though the Republic stands only because of your brilliance." Obi-Wan's dry tone sharpened. Which, while flattering, is not usually how the Chancellor distributes his compliments. The lift opened. They stepped out into a corridor lined with tall windows and recessed alcoves where old busts of Jedi Masters watched the living hurry by. The war room lay ahead, its doors sealed. A pair of temple guards stood to either side. Anakin felt a heaviness settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the dream and everything to do with Palpatine's favor. He had once taken comfort in it. As a boy newly arrived on Coruscant, uncertain of everything except his own hunger to prove himself, he had been startled by the Chancellor's attention and warmed by it too. Palpatine had always seemed to understand the loneliness of being exceptional in a room full of people who measured you with suspicion. He listened. He remembered details. He offered admiration without correction. Only lately had Anakin begun to understand how dangerous that could be. Inside the war room, hollow projections hovered above the central table in pale blue layers, sectors contested, supply routes threatened, red marks blooming and fading like wounds across the map of the galaxy. Masters stood around the display in varying degrees of calm. Windu severe and still. Ki-Adi-Mundi frowning over troop dispositions. Plo Koon with his hands clasped, gaze unreadable behind his mask. Shakti leaning over a column of data from Camino with the focused fatigue of someone who had spent too many nights studying reports instead of sleeping. Yoda was not present. He had left days ago for Kashyyyk and had not yet returned, though his absence still felt somehow like a form of attention. Anakin took his place beside Obi-Wan. The briefing began at once. Grievous had struck shipping lines near the Perlemian trade route. Senate security requested additional Jedi support for delegations traveling to and from systems wavering between loyalty and secession. Clone losses on Ba's Pity were worse than the first summaries had indicated. Names and worlds and casualty estimates moved around the room with the cold rhythm of necessity. Anakin answered when asked, offered tactical recommendations when required, and watched his own mind do it from a slight distance. He could command fleets, while part of him still stood in a white chamber watching Padmé die. It occurred to him that this was not resilience. It was compartmentalization so old it had become indistinguishable from discipline. When the military updates ended, Windu rested both hands on the edge of the table. There is another matter. The room stilled. The Chancellor has informed the Council that he intends to appoint Anakin Skywalker as his personal representative. A current passed through the room. Ki-Adi-Mundi's brows rose. Shakti straightened slowly. Plo Koon said nothing, but Anakin felt his attention sharpen. Obi-Wan did not look surprised, which meant he had known or guessed this before they entered. The knowledge brought a brief, irrational flare of annoyance. Then Anakin saw the angle of his shoulders, the tension held beneath formal calm, and understood the silence had not been indifference. It had been caution. Windu's gaze fixed on Anakin. You were aware of this? No. Then you know as much as we do. Which is almost certainly less than the Chancellor thinks he's giving away, Obi-Wan said. That earned him a short look from Windu. Quite. Anakin felt every eye in the room turned toward him in some variation of concern, calculation, or distrust. He had lived with that mixture for years. The chosen one. Too old to train. Too gifted. Too volatile. Too close to the Chancellor. Not enough of anything except danger. He was tired enough that the old resentment barely flared. It just settled, familiar and bitter, into place. What does he want from me? He asked. What any politician wants from a symbol, Shakti said quietly. Legitimacy. Or influence, Ki-Adi-Mundi added. Windu's expression did not soften. The Chancellor has amassed authority beyond what was ever meant to be temporary. He surrounds himself with loyalists. He delays any serious discussion of relinquishing emergency powers. Now he places a Jedi Knight in his orbit under the appearance of honor. Anakin folded his arms. You think I'm being used? Obi-Wan answered before Windu could. We think the Chancellor rarely acts for only one reason. The distinction should not have mattered. Yet coming from Obi-Wan it did. Windu exhaled once through his nose. You will attend if summoned. You will hear what he says, and you will inform the Council. There it was. Direct, cold, unadorned. The same task, perhaps, that would have felt like accusation if couched in secrecy. Yet because the room held it openly, because Obi-Wan was beside him and not across from him, it landed differently. Not cleanly, but differently. Anakin met Windu's gaze. You're asking me to report on the Supreme Chancellor. I'm asking you to remember that the Jedi serve the Republic, Windu said. Not a single man. For one dangerous heartbeat, Anakin almost said that the Republic had become a single man in all but name. He bit the words back. Around the table, the Masters stood in their robes while clone armies died on worlds most of the Senate had never seen. Everyone in the room knew how far events had drifted from what they were supposed to be. Naming it would change nothing yet. The meeting broke moments later. Masters peeled away in pairs, carrying assignments and concerns into the day. Obi-Wan remained where he was until the room had nearly emptied. You don't have to like it, he said. Anakin laughed under his breath without humor. That's fortunate. You only have to survive it. That sounds encouraging. It's meant to be realistic. Anakin looked down at the holomap as the remaining projections dimmed. Coruscant glowed there at the center of a web of conflict, too important and too fragile at once. Do you trust him? Palpatine, Obi-Wan asked. Anakin nodded. Obi-Wan was quiet long enough that the answer mattered before he spoke it. I trust that he believes every kind thing he says to you. I also trust that belief does not make him harmless." The statement landed with unnerving precision. It was exactly the shape of the discomfort Anakin had been unable to name. A temple page entered and bowed. "General Skywalker, the Chancellor requests your presence at the executive office before midday." Of course he did. Anakin took the summons, then glanced at Obi-Wan. For the briefest instant he considered telling him everything right there. The dream. Padmé. The fear so sharp it made every other danger seem secondary. But old habits held. The moment passed. Obi-Wan seemed to sense the near confession anyway. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in concern. "Anakin." "I know," Anakin said, though he did not know nearly enough. He turned away before Obi-Wan could ask the question that might have broken him open too early. And as he left the war room, the air in the corridor felt colder than it had before. The Chancellor's executive offices were designed to make every visitor feel smaller, without ever appearing crude enough to admit it. The ceilings were impossibly high, the windows taller still, their transparent steel panes turning the city into an enormous moving mural of airspeeders, towers, drifting cloud, and reflected sunlight. Everything gleamed. The dark wood, the polished stone, the discreet bronze ornamentation lifted from older Republican styles to suggest continuity with a nobler age. 2 red guards stood at the entrance like carved warnings given breath. Palpatine rose from his chair as Anakin entered, his face opening into warmth so practiced it passed for sincerity, even when Anakin was looking straight at it. "My boy," he said. Come in. I was beginning to fear the Council had buried you beneath paperwork." Anakin bowed his head briefly. "Not yet. Pity. It would be the one enemy you have never truly bested." Palpatine gestured him toward a seat. A decanter and 2 glasses waited on the low table beside the window, untouched. The old man moved with more softness than age should have allowed, everything about him curated to seem benign. His robes today were a deeper red than usual, almost the color of old arterial blood. Anakin found himself noticing that, and wondering why he had never noticed it before. "You did well over Coruscant," Palpatine said once they were seated. "Better than well. The Republic owes you a debt. The Republic owes a debt to a lot of clone pilots who didn't make it back." Palpatine's expression saddened beautifully. "Yes. Tragic." Then, with impeccable timing, "And still, leadership matters. Courage matters. There are moments in history when a single person's choices preserve civilization." The compliment should have pleased him. For years it would have. Today it slid over nerves already flayed by too little sleep and left behind only discomfort. "The Council told me about your appointment," Anakin said. "Did they?" Palpatine smiled faintly. "Then I'm spared the pleasure of surprising you. I'm not a master." "No," Palpatine said, and there was an odd glint in his eyes then, something like indignation on Anakin's behalf. "You are not. A fact I find more curious the longer the war continues." Anakin leaned back, crossing one ankle over the other to keep from visibly tightening. "The Council has its reasons. Bureaucracies always do." Palpatine waved one hand as if brushing away a trivial annoyance. "Forgive me. I should not speak ill of your colleagues. But you must admit they do not always appreciate you as they ought." "Nursery." It was an old line between them, so familiar Anakin could almost have supplied the cadence himself. Once it had felt comforting, this recognition of a grievance he rarely voiced. Today he heard the machinery under it. Not concern. Placement. Pressure applied to a known fault line. "The Jedi aren't easy to impress," he said. "Nor easy to move." Palpatine studied him. "Yet they rely upon you more than most, as do I." He let that rest between them. Anakin looked out toward the window. Far below, traffic streamed in precise chaos through the sky lanes. Somewhere beyond those towers, the Senate dome sat like a polished wound in the city, receiving petitions, praise, fear, and ambition in equal measure. Coruscant ran on power disguised as procedure. Palpatine understood that better than anyone alive. "You asked for me," Anakin said. "Why?" "Because I prefer honesty when possible." The Chancellor folded his hands. The Council will watch me. They always do. I imagine they may even ask you to listen more carefully than usual while you are in my company. Nay. Anakin's head turned sharply. Why would you think that? My dear boy, because I have been a politician longer than you have been alive. Palpatine's smile broadened with grandfatherly patience. Mutual suspicion is the dull music of governance. The Jedi distrust concentration of power. The Senate fears whatever the Jedi do not explain. I stand in the middle and disappoint everyone by surviving. It was so nearly true that it made Anakin uneasy in a deeper way than a direct lie might have. Palpatine was too intelligent to state falsehoods when partial truths could do greater work. And yet, the Chancellor continued, voice lowering, I still wished you near me, because you see things others do not. You understand costs. Anakin thought of Dooku on his knees, of two crossed blades at the Count's throat, of Palpatine's voice, urgent and eager. Do it. It was what he deserved. The memory had gnawed at him ever since. Palpatine must have seen something in his face, because he inclined his head. You are troubled. It's been a long war. Yes. The word came almost tenderly. And war forces choices that peacetime judges from the luxury of distance. You did what was necessary aboard General Grievous' vessel. Anakin's stare hardened. I didn't say I was thinking about that. No, Palpatine said. But you were? The office seemed quieter suddenly. Even the city beyond the glass felt suspended. I shouldn't have killed him, Anakin said before he could stop himself. Palpatine's gaze did not waver. You ended a war criminal responsible for the deaths of millions. There are worse stains on a conscience. Now, he was disarmed. He was dangerous. The words were soft, almost soothing, yet a chill moved through Anakin all the same. Because he had heard the argument before, inside himself, in the instant after the blade had fallen, while he had been trying not to see the horror on his own face. Tell me, Palpatine said, if the choice returned and the price of mercy were countless more lives, would you make a different one? Anakin did not answer. He thought of the dream, of Padmé dying because he had failed to act in time. Mercy, restraint, patience. Those were virtues until the person you loved stopped breathing. Then they became words other people offered while you learned what helplessness tasted like. Palpatine watched understanding dawn in silence. It was almost elegant, the way he did not press too quickly. You carry more than battle fatigue, he said at last. I can see it. Anakin gave a short, humorless breath. Can you? Yes. Palpatine leaned forward slightly. You are haunted by the possibility of losing someone. The accuracy of it jolted through him so sharply that he nearly rose. The Force stirred around the Chancellor in that instant, but not in the clear, living way it did around Jedi. This felt sheathed, masked, like heat behind a wall. How do you know that? Anakin asked. Palpatine spread his hands. Because I have lived, because power attracts enemies and affection creates vulnerabilities. Every serious man eventually learns he is not most afraid of death for himself. The answer was ordinary enough to be plausible. Yet, the sensation remained. That hidden heat. That almost pressure against his mind, subtle as the weight in a storm-charged room before the first strike of lightning. Anakin stood and moved toward the window, putting distance between them under pretense of admiring the view. If you summoned me to discuss my private anxieties, Chancellor, you could have sent a droid instead. Palpatine chuckled. No droid has ever accused me of overreach with such style. He let the humor pass. Come to the opera tonight. Anakin glanced back. The opera. A performance from the old worlds. Rare. Exquisite. You need beauty in your life, Anakin. Endless battle briefings will make a machine of you, and the Jedi already ask enough mechanical obedience from men who were born human. Nay, Padmé. The mention of machinery might have been coincidence. It might not. With Palpatine, one never knew where accident ended and targeting began. I may have other duties. Then neglect them for 2 hours. The Chancellor's tone stayed light, but his eyes did not. You have earned that much. Anakin looked at him, at the gentle lined face, the seemingly paternal concern. If he had not been carrying the dream like a knife under the ribs, perhaps the invitation would have felt harmless. Instead, it felt strategic. Still, the Council had asked him to listen. I'll attend, he said. Good. Palpatine rose with him. And Anakin, whatever troubles you, do not imagine that the Jedi possess the only wisdom in the galaxy. Their discipline is admirable. Their imagination is not always equal to the Force itself. There it was again. Not direct enough to challenge. Not vague enough to dismiss. Anakin bowed and took his leave. In the corridor outside, between the silent red guards and the great carved doors, he stopped for a moment and drew a slow breath. He told himself the chill beneath his skin came from exhaustion, from guilt, from the aftertaste of political manipulation, too transparent to be anything but irritating. Yet the force around the office had felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, nothing a council chamber would call proof, but wrong in the way a corridor feels wrong when there should be a guard at the end of it, and there is not. Wrong like a note bent slightly flat in a familiar melody. As he descended to the landing platform, the dream rose in his memory again. Not the white room this time. The unseen smile in the shadows. For the first time, he found himself wondering whether the smile had a face he already knew. That evening, the apartment was warm with the domestic illusions wealth could purchase. Low lamps turned the walls amber. A service droid had set a table near the western windows where the city's dusk reflected in sheets of red and gold across the glass. Somewhere in the adjoining room, soft music played from an old Naboo composition Padmé favored when the Senate had exhausted her. It should have felt safe. It almost did. Anakin arrived late and carried the day into the room with him. Temple dust, fuel smoke, the metallic trace of starfighter systems, the tension of too many conversations that had all left him emptier than before. Padmé looked up from a datapad filled with legislative text and immediately set it aside. You came back, she said. He took the words as welcome instead of rebuke, because that was how she meant them, though something in him knew he had begun to deserve the other interpretation. I said I would. You've said that before. There was no heat in it, only truth. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. The line between her brows eased, but did not disappear. She gestured to the table. Sit. Eat something before you try to pretend you're not hungry. He sat because she was right. He was ravenous and hadn't noticed until the smell of food reached him. The droid poured a broth rich with herbs from Naboo, set up flatbread still warm, then withdrew with perfect discretion. For a few minutes they ate in near silence, and the quiet had the strange texture of people approaching a necessary conversation from opposite sides. Padmé broke first. I met with the delegation this afternoon. He looked up. How many are with you now? Enough to worry the Chancellor's allies and not enough to stop them. She folded her napkin with deliberate care. Bail thinks more systems would speak publicly if they believed the war was truly nearing its end. But as long as Grievous remains at large, anyone who argues against emergency powers can be painted as reckless. You're not reckless. No, she said, and a small, sharp smile touched her mouth. Which is why they've started calling me naive instead. He reached across the table. She took his hand immediately. What do you need from me? The question brought a flicker of sadness to her eyes. That's kind. It's also not the right question. He frowned. What do you need? She asked. You came in here looking as if you've been carrying a reactor core in your chest all day. He stared at her. You always know. Padmé's fingers moved lightly over his knuckles. Only when you let me look. He leaned back, exhaled, and tried to decide where the truth ought to begin. With the council asking him to watch the Chancellor? With Palpatine's invitation? With the dream? None of it stood alone anymore. Each thread tugged the others. The council thinks Palpatine wants me close for political reasons, he said. That's not exactly a revelation. No. He rubbed at his temple. But Obi-Wan thinks there's more to it. Do you? Anakin hesitated. I don't know. Padmé nodded once, slowly, as if this confirmed something she had been fearing. I've watched him for years, Anakin. Men like him are never simply fond of anyone. Affection may be real to them. That doesn't mean it isn't useful. The phrasing struck him because it echoed Obi-Wan so closely. I trust that he believes every kind thing he says to you. He had not expected the two people who loved him most to see the Chancellor with such similar clarity. He invited me to the opera tonight, Anakin said. Did he? You sound as though I've been asked to a duel. Padmé's mouth tilted. Sometimes the difference is only in the music. He laughed once, softly. It helped. Not enough, but some. The city beyond the windows had darkened fully now. Traffic lights streamed like veins of color through the night. Coruscant glittered because power-like spectacle. She withdrew her hand only long enough to move around the table and sit beside him instead of across from him. And the other thing? She asked. He turned to her. What other thing? The one you keep circling because you think if you speak it directly, the ceiling will fall in. There was no point pretending ignorance with Padmé when she spoke like that. She knew him too well. He looked down at her hand resting near the curve of her belly and let the lie die before it formed. I went to the Chancellor carrying the dream, he said. Her face changed very slightly. And he knew. Anakin's voice roughened. Not exactly. Not enough to name you. But he saw it was about losing someone. Padmé was silent for several heartbeats. You think he read your mind? I think... He stopped. Started again. I think being near him felt wrong. Now she was truly still. Wrong how? He searched for language. As if something was hidden. As if he was speaking one conversation and there was another underneath it. That has always been true of Palpatine. I don't mean politically. She studied him without blinking. The old music in the next room reached the end of its piece and fell quiet. Suddenly the apartment seemed to be listening. You should tell Obi-Wan, she said. The answer was so immediate that he almost laughed in disbelief. That's your solution. It's my first one. He'll tell the Council. Good. He'll tell the Council, Anakin repeated, sharper now, because the image of Windu's face, of the room's cold geometry, made his chest tighten. And then what? They'll discuss my lack of discipline? Remind me that fear leads to anger and attachment leads to suffering? They won't save you by reciting doctrine at me. No. Padmé did not recoil. If anything, she became steadier. Maybe not. But silence will not save me either. He rose and moved away before he realized he was doing it, crossing to the window with 2 hard strides. The city lights stared back at him in fractured reflections. His own face hovered over the night, pale and strained, looking older than he felt and younger than he needed to be. I know what happens when I wait, he said. I know what it costs. Behind him, he heard her stand. Her voice when it came was close. Then don't wait. He turned. You make it sound simple. No. She approached until only a breath of space remained between them. I make it sound possible. Those are different things. He looked at her and saw not a senator, not the polished public figure the Republic knew, but the girl from Naboo who had walked into battle before she was old enough to vote in most systems, the woman who could be terrified and resolute at the same time. He loved her partly for that impossible steadiness, and partly because it exposed every weakness in him he preferred not to examine. I'm afraid, he said. It was the first time he had given the word its proper shape. Padmé reached up and touched his face. I know. I can't lose you. I know. I keep seeing it. His voice cracked then, just once. And every time I think about telling the Council, all I can hear is my mother begging me not to leave her on that planet. All I can hear is how long it took me to get there. How useless I was. Padmé's eyes filled, though she did not let the tears fall. You were a son, not a god. The distinction felt cruel because it was true. Anakin looked down. That's not how it felt. No, she whispered. "And that's why you have to tell someone before fear convinces you that only power can fix what love cannot control." The words hung between them, too perceptive to escape. He thought of Palpatine in his crimson office, speaking of wisdom beyond the Jedi. He thought of the dream's shadow. He thought of the part of himself that wanted solutions, certainty, mastery, anything except surrender to uncertainty. Padmé took his hand and laid it again over the swell of her belly. "This child deserves more than your terror. So do you." "No." He closed his eyes. For a moment, there was only warmth beneath his palm. Her hand over his, the murmur of traffic and distant thunder somewhere in the city's layered atmosphere. Life. Fragile, secret, glorious life. Not abstract. Not symbolic. Real enough to be lost. When he opened his eyes, some decision had shifted inside him. Though not fully enough to call it courage yet. "I spoke to Master Yoda once," he said. "When?" "Today. Briefly. Not the whole truth." Her brows rose. "And?" "He told me to be mindful of the future without clinging to it." "That sounds like Yoda." It sounded wiser when he said it. Padmé almost smiled. "Most things do." He breathed out. "I'll go back tonight." "To Yoda." He hesitated. "Maybe. Anakin. I'm trying." "I know." She stepped up on one foot and kissed him. Slow and aching and very human. "Try faster." He rested his forehead against hers and laughed, despite himself. And there in the center of fear, something fragile but unmistakable appeared. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility that honesty might not destroy everything it touched. When he finally left for the temple, the night had deepened. Behind him, in the amber-lit apartment above the endless city, Padmé stood with one hand at her stomach and watched until his speeder vanished into the rivers of traffic. The meditation chamber sat high in one of the temple's older towers, where even Coruscant seemed capable of falling quiet. Rain moved down the tall windows in silver threads. Beyond them, the city blurred into a field of smeared light and shadow, tower lamps softened by weather into halos. The room itself held almost nothing. Low cushions, a ring of old carved pillars, small lamps burning in niches, the faint scent of oil and stone. It was a place made to strip away distraction. Anakin had never liked it much. Rooms that invited stillness also invited memory. Yoda sat near the far window with his cane laid across his knees, as if he had been expecting him for hours. "Late you are," the old master said without opening his eyes. Anakin stopped a respectful distance away. "I didn't know you were back on Coruscant." "Few things you know tonight, Yoda's eyes opened, luminous and sharp. "Sit." Anakin obeyed. The floor was cold even through his robes. Rain tapped softly against the glass. In the temple below, lifts hummed and distant voices rose and fell, muted by stone and height, until they became almost another weather. For a little while, Yoda said nothing. It was not the withholding silence of the council chamber, where silence often felt like judgment waiting for sharper words. This was a different kind. A place being made. A space into which truth could step if it chose. Anakin's throat tightened around the old familiar resistance. "I had another dream," he said. Yoda inclined his head. "Yes. It was Padmé." The old master's gaze did not change. No shock. No immediate rebuke. Only attention. "She dies," Anakin said, because there was no cleaner way to say it. "In childbirth. I see it over and over. Sometimes differently, but always ending there." "Nah, Mantai," Rain whispered down the window behind Yoda. The old Jedi folded his hands around the head of his cane. "More than one life, in that vision there is." Anakin stared. "What?" Yoda's ears dipped slightly. "Shadows on your future, many, but empty that room is not. Twins," he thought before he could stop himself, though he had no reason for the certainty. The dream's double cry returned to him with sudden force. Two voices. Two lives beginning inside the same terror. His heart lurched. Yoda watched him take that in. Attached to this fear, you have become. How am I supposed not to be? The question broke sharper than he intended. He forced himself to breathe. I'm sorry. Yoda's gaze shifted to the rain-streaked city. Anger, not what I hear most in you. Grief, older than this dream. Anakin looked down at his hands. Flesh and metal, each equally helpless in the right circumstances. My mother. Yes. Yoda did not phrase it as invitation, yet the room opened under the word. I saw her suffering before I went to Tatooine, Anakin said. I knew something was wrong. I told myself there would be time. There wasn't. He heard his own voice flattening with remembered self-hatred. I reached her. She died in my arms. Tell this to the Council. You did not. No. Why? Anakin almost laughed. Because I slaughtered a village after. The confession hit the room like a dropped weight. He had never said it to a living Jedi. Not fully. Padmé knew enough. Obi-Wan suspected there had been darkness there, perhaps more than he wished to know. But the naked truth had lived in him alone. Yoda lowered his eyes. Not in shock. Not in disgust. Something more complicated. Something like sorrow for a path long seen and never fully interrupted. Terrible that was, Yoda said quietly. Yes. And carried it alone, you have. Yes. The rain thickened. Lightning flared far away among the towers, turning the whole chamber silver for an instant. Anakin could not tell whether the shaking in his hands came from the storm or the confession. At length Yoda said, A wound hidden does not heal cleaner, only deeper. Anakin swallowed. If the Order had known, you would have cast me out. Perhaps. Yoda's mouth turned down. Or perhaps failed you sooner, we would have understood. Wise the old rules are. Perfect, they are not. In war much has been hidden, too much. The words landed like a door opening in a wall. Anakin had long ago accepted as solid. You're not angry. Angry, I can be later. A flicker of dry humor crossed Yoda's face and vanished. Useful, that would not be tonight. Anakin stared at him, feeling strangely off balance. He had come prepared for admonition, perhaps for distance. Compassion from Yoda was rarer, and therefore more disarming. The dream feels like a warning, he said. Not just fear. Warnings visions can be, Yoda said. So also snares. The dark side clouds what may come, shows truth in fragments, teaches a mind to seize the sharpest piece and call it destiny. Then what am I supposed to do? Wait? Accept it? Accept loss. All beings must. Surrender to fear. None must. That sounds like the same thing when it's someone you love. Yoda's eyes sharpened. No. The force of that small word held the room still. Love, Yoda said slowly, is not the shadow. Possession is. The wish to command life and death because grief feels unbearable. That is where darkness enters. Mourn, we all do. Fear, we all do. The test is not whether pain comes. The test is what bargain you will make to escape it. Ne, di shen, di, ma, de, sh. Bi hao, Padmé, do, garaya. Anakin thought of Palpatine's office again. Of hidden heat. Of wisdom beyond the Jedi. A bargain, yes. Not yet offered directly. But, waiting. Yoda seemed to read some of this from his face. There is another matter. Anakin looked up. The Chancellor. You know. Know enough to be troubled, I do. Yoda tapped one claw lightly against the cane. Clouded around him the Force has become. Long has this been so, yet darker now. Sat beside him, you have. Felt this, perhaps. Anakin stared. I did. Then speak it to Obi-Wan. The answer came so fast, so precisely in line with Padmé's, that Anakin felt almost absurdly cornered by the universe. Why him? At that, Yoda's expression softened into something ancient and almost fond. Because listen, he will. Because judge first, he will not. Because more than rules, he loves you, though clumsy with saying so he may be. The truth of it hurt. Yoda looked past him toward the rain. A voice I hear sometimes now. Old, patient. My old Padawan's master, Qui-Gon Jinn. Anakin blinked. Of all the things he had expected tonight, that was not one of them. Qui-Gon. Living through the Force, he learned. Much to teach still there is. Yoda's gaze returned to him. Control over death, this is not. Communion. Continuance. Trust in what the Force gives and takes. Hard wisdom. No comfort for a man who wants guarantees. Anakin gave a rough breath that might have been a laugh. Then he wouldn't have much use for me. Useful to him, perhaps not. In need of him, perhaps very much. None now. Silence fell again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited by the things spoken, and the things now possible to say. At last Yoda rose with slow care, leaning on his cane. Speak to Obi-Wan before fear chooses your council for you. Anakin stood as well. And if he tells the council everything? Yoda's eyes narrowed. Then at last dealing with truth we may be. Better than dealing with what silence breeds. He moved toward the door, then paused. Strong you are, Skywalker. Strong enough to ask for help, perhaps stronger than to stand alone. No. When Anakin left the chamber, the storm had deepened over Coruscant. Thunder moved between towers like distant artillery. He walked through the temple's dim corridors hearing Yoda's words alongside Padmé's. And for the first time in years, the possibility of confession felt not like surrender, but like strategy. He did not yet know whether that would be enough to save anyone. But for the first time, he wanted to find out before it was too late. He found Obi-Wan where he should have expected to find him, awake long after reason, standing on one of the outer balconies that faced east over the city. The storm was passing. Clouds dragged low across the upper air lanes, thinning at the edges where dawn threatened them from below. Wind worried the hems of their robes and carried with it the mineral smell of rain on stone, the sterile chill of altitude, the faint spice and exhaust that never fully left Coruscant's atmosphere. The city beneath them blazed in layered constellations, lights suspended in endless vertical distance. Obi-Wan did not turn at once. I was beginning to think you'd chosen sleep over dread. I'm considering it for tomorrow. A bold plan. The familiar ease in his voice nearly undid Anakin more effectively than sternness would have. He came to stand beside his former master, leaning his hands on the cool parapet. For a little while they simply looked out over the city, two figures balanced above a world too busy to notice how close history stood to changing. I spoke to Yoda, Anakin said. Obi-Wan glanced at him, and survived. That's promising. Me. He told me to speak to you. That was either wisdom or an appalling lapse in judgment. Anakin laughed once, then the laugh thinned into silence. Obi-Wan heard the shift at once. The humor left his face. What is it? There was no smooth way to begin. So Anakin started where the pain was sharpest. I'm seeing her die. Obi-Wan's expression did not change, but his whole attention turned. Padmé. It was not a question. The sheer simplicity of that struck Anakin motionless. All the preparation, all the dread in Obi-Wan had reached the truth in one word. You knew, Anakin said. A faint, tired kindness passed through Obi-Wan's eyes. Anakin, I may not spend my life in the Senate, but I'm not blind. The answer should have embarrassed him. Instead, it made something in his chest loosen with abrupt, almost painful force. He stared out at the city because looking directly at Obi-Wan felt impossible for a moment. How long? He asked. A long while. Obi-Wan folded his arms. Not every detail. I didn't want them, but enough. And you said nothing. You said nothing. Anakin let out a hard breath. So that made it easier? No. Obi-Wan's voice softened. It made it yours to tell. The wind lifted between them. Far below, A transport beacon changed from red to green. Anakin looked at his hands. I've been dreaming that she dies in childbirth. It won't stop. I thought if I kept it contained, if I stayed focused, I could figure out how to prevent it before anyone knew. Anyone, Obi-Wan repeated gently, meaning the people most likely to help you. Frustration flashed. The people most likely to quote the code at me. Possibly, Obi-Wan admitted. We do love our ancient phrases. Then he shifted, shoulders settling with decision. But not me. Not tonight. Anakin turned to him then. Obi-Wan's face in the pre-dawn half-light looked older than it had after Geonosis. Older than it had after Mandalore. After the many campaigns and narrow survivals that had carved away whatever softness war allowed men to keep. There were silver strands at his temples now, when the light struck just right. They made him look less fragile, not more. Like weathered stone. Like something that had endured enough to know endurance was not wisdom by itself. I know what fear of loss does, Obi-Wan said quietly. Anakin frowned. You mean Satine? A shadow crossed Obi-Wan's expression, brief but unmistakable. Yes. He had never spoken her name to Anakin like that before. Not as a formal story from the Mandalore campaigns. Not as an old wound acknowledged between brothers. Simply yes. If she had asked me to leave the Order, Obi-Wan said, gaze returning to the city, I would have done it. The words dropped into the dawn like a stone into deep water. Anakin stared at him. He had known, in some dim half-formed way, that there had been something between Obi-Wan and Duchess Satine Kryze beyond political alliance. Everyone who had watched them closely had known. But hearing the magnitude of it from Obi-Wan's own mouth shook him. You never told me that. I had no interest in turning my private failings into your permission slip. That isn't what this is. No, Obi-Wan said. It isn't. Silence drew around them again. Altered now. Less guarded. Less built on performance. I should have told you about my mother, Anakin said. Yes. I should have told you what I did after she died. Obi-Wan closed his eyes for a moment, and the pain in that tiny gesture was answer enough. Yes. Shame burned through Anakin so fiercely he almost stepped back. I can't take any of it back. No. Obi-Wan turned to face him fully. But you can stop adding secrecy to grief and calling it strength. The words hit clean. Anakin looked away. Yoda said something like that. Then the situation is truly dire. That earned the smallest ghost of a smile from Anakin, and Obi-Wan let it stay only a second before continuing. You are terrified, Obi-Wan said. Fair enough. The woman you love is carrying your child while the galaxy is collapsing in slow motion around us. I'd be worried for your sanity if you weren't terrified. But fear is not instruction. It is only information. That sounds like something you tell younglings. Yes, Obi-Wan said. Because sometimes the things we teach children are true before we become too proud to hear them. Anakin's throat tightened. The city below was turning slowly from black to indigo. Dawn found the highest towers first. I don't know how to lose her. Neither do I, Obi-Wan said. The bluntness of it made Anakin look up. Obi-Wan's gaze was direct, stripped of every easy comfort. I don't know how to lose the people I love either. I don't know how to do it well or nobly or without fury. I only know that when I tried to bear that sort of thing alone, it nearly hollowed me out. So listen carefully, because this is the part I should have said sooner. He stepped closer. You are not alone in this. Something in Anakin gave way. Not dramatically. No collapse, no tears, no visible break. He was too practiced for that. But the effort of holding himself hard against fear eased just enough that the first clean breath he had taken all day moved through him. I told Padmé about the dreams, he said. Obi-Wan nodded once. Good. She told me to tell you. Remarkable woman. She also told me to try faster. Even more remarkable. Anakin rubbed one hand over his face. Palpatine knows something is wrong. Obi-Wan's expression sharpened instantly. How much? I don't think he knows it's her. But he knew I was afraid of losing someone. And being near him. He searched again for the language he had failed to find in the Chancellor's office. It felt wrong. Obi-Wan went very still. Wrong how? Like the Force was being pressed flat, like there was depth under him I couldn't see. He met Obi-Wan's eyes. I know how that sounds. It sounds like something we take seriously. You believe me? Obi-Wan's answer was immediate. Yes. The relief was so violent it almost became anger. Anger at how easy it could have been to receive belief if he had only asked for it earlier. Anger at himself for needing it. Anger at all the years between them littered with half-truths because both of them had mistaken reserve for maturity. What do we do? Anakin asked. Obi-Wan exhaled, gaze lifting toward the paling sky. We tell the Council enough to protect Padmé, and enough to make them investigate the Chancellor, without turning this into a public spectacle before we know what we're dealing with. They'll expel me. Perhaps later, Obi-Wan said. If so, I'll argue with them then. Right now, I'm more interested in keeping your wife alive. The word hit Anakin like a bell. Wife. Spoken plainly, without condemnation. Real in the air between them. He gave a short, broken laugh. You really did know? I suspected. And I am not nearly as outraged as you seem to think I should be. Obi-Wan's mouth tipped at one corner. Though I reserve the right to be annoyed, you made me lie to everyone by omission for years. I didn't ask you to. No, Obi-Wan said. You merely put me in a position to choose between compassion and bureaucratic virtue. It was very inconsiderate. No. Anakin shook his head, and for one strange precious second they were simply themselves again. Teacher and student, brothers, men who had survived too much and still found room for dry humor. Then, Obi-Wan sobered. Come. To the Council? Yes. No? Now, Obi-Wan said. Before you have time to rethink it and decide the solution is leaping through a window into traffic. Anakin stared at the awakening city one last time. Somewhere out there Padmé would still be asleep or perhaps just rising, reading briefing notes in a silk robe with one hand at her stomach. Somewhere out there Palpatine would be beginning another day in which he meant to shape the Republic to his will. Somewhere in the Force the future was moving, branching, darkening, opening. He straightened. All right. Obi-Wan clapped a hand briefly against the back of his shoulder. The gesture lasted only an instant, but it carried years of comradeship and more love than either of them was inclined to articulate. Then together they turned from the balcony and walked toward the chamber where truth would either save them or destroy what remained between them and the Order. Anakin found to his surprise that he preferred either outcome to silence. The council chamber had always seemed to Anakin less like a room than an altitude. Perhaps it was the windows, vast and curving, giving the impression of sitting inside the sky itself. Perhaps it was the old polished floor on which every step sounded too clear, too formal, as if truth ought to walk more carefully there than anywhere else. Or perhaps it was simply history, the accumulated weight of judgment, wisdom, error, patience, blindness, all arranged in a circle of chairs overlooking Coruscant. This morning the chamber felt more dangerous than any battlefield he had entered in the last 3 years. Mace Windu sat upright with his hands on the carved arms of his chair, unreadable as carved stone. Ki-Adi-Mundi and Plo Koon flanked him. Shakti had been summoned from her archive work and looked irritated at the interruption until she saw Anakin's face, at which point irritation vanished into concentration. 2 other masters were present as well, silent and grave. Yoda had not yet joined them physically, but his holographic image shimmered in blue near the center of the chamber, returning them the distant authority of Kashyyyk. Obi-Wan did not take his own seat immediately. He stood beside Anakin. Windu's gaze moved from one to the other. This is irregular. Yes, Obi-Wan said. Which is why we're here before breakfast instead of after. A few of the masters looked less than pleased by the attempt at levity. Windu did not blink. Speak. Obi-Wan glanced once at Anakin, not to urge him but to give him the choice of beginning. Anakin realized with a jolt that the choice was real. Obi-Wan would carry the matter if needed. He was not placing Anakin under the lights alone, yet he was also refusing to steal his agency by speaking over him. It was such a small distinction. It mattered enormously. Anakin stepped forward. "I've been having visions," he said. That at least did not shock them. Jedi saw many things. The room's attention sharpened, but no one moved. "Of whom?" Windu asked. "Senator Amidala." Now Shak Tai's eyes narrowed. Ki-Adi-Mundi shifted slightly in his chair. Plo Koon gave no visible sign, but Anakin felt a deepening of focus from him in the Force, attentive and unexpectedly gentle. "What nature of visions?" Windu said. "She dies in childbirth." The chamber went silent enough that the city's distant hum seemed to rise through the windows. Yoda's hologram studied him. "Certain of this future, are you?" "No," Anakin said. "But certain enough to be afraid." Windu leaned back a fraction. "Afraid for the senator." Anakin looked directly at him. "For my wife." "There. Be." The words struck the chamber like a physical thing. Shakti's breath caught. Ki-Adi-Mundi shut his eyes once, a brief, pained acknowledgement of what he had probably suspected and chosen not to pursue. One of the other masters made a low, disbelieving sound. Windu became stiller than before, which on him was more dangerous than visible anger. Obi-Wan spoke into the silence. "I've known enough of the truth for some time. I take responsibility for not bringing it to the Council earlier." Windu turned his head. "You take responsibility?" "Yes. Extraordinary." "I thought compassion preferable to scandal," Obi-Wan said. "Compassion can become indulgence." "So can dogma," Obi-Wan replied. The room tightened. Anakin stepped in before the exchange could harden into lines already too old to matter. "Punish me later. Right now this is not about rules." Windu's eyes snapped back to him. "Rules exist because fear distorts judgment, Skywalker." "Then you'll be pleased to hear I'm asking for help before it does." That landed. Not because it was eloquent, but because it was undeniably true. Yoda's hologram lowered its head slightly. "Wise that may be." Windu exhaled once. "Continue." So Anakin did. He spoke of the dreams in more detail. The White Chamber, Padmé's pain, the recurring nature of it, the way the visions had sharpened since the battle over Coruscant. He did not speak yet of Tusken blood or his mother's death beyond the simple confession that he knew too well what it meant to ignore such warnings and arrive too late. Obi-Wan's presence beside him steadied the edges of the account every time old shame threatened to derail it. Then he told them about Palpatine. Not accusation. Not yet. Sensation. Timing. The Chancellor's unusual insight into his fear. The invitation to the opera. The suggestion that the Jedi did not possess all wisdom worth having. The hidden pressure in the Force around him. At that, Shakti straightened sharply. He intervened in the matter of CT 5555. Anakin frowned. "Fives?" She nodded. After the trooper's death, inquiries into the clone behavioral modification implants were sealed under executive authority. Kamino's explanation was accepted too quickly. I argued for a longer review. Windu's gaze shifted to her. "You did not present it to the full council." "The evidence was incomplete," Shakti said. "And at the time we were under direct pressure to stabilize public confidence in the army." She looked at Anakin. The trooper believed there was a plot against the Jedi. The words seemed to chill the chamber. Anakin remembered Fives. Angry, brilliant, unraveling under truths no one wanted to hear. He remembered the tension around that whole affair, the way it had been smoothed over by officials with too much confidence and too little curiosity. At the time, the war had demanded forward motion. There was always another crisis, another fire. A galaxy could hide anything if it lit enough emergencies at once. Windu folded his arms. "Our trooper paranoia does not make the Chancellor responsible." "No," Obi-Wan said, "but it does make his personal suppression of the matter inconvenient." Ki-Adi-Mundi's long fingers steepled. If the senator is at risk because the visions are being manipulated, then whoever manipulates them knows Skywalker intimately. Or has studied him well, Plo Koon said. Anakin's jaw tightened. Palpatine has known me since I was 9. That moved through the room with its own weight. Yoda's blue image flickered faintly. Close to the Chancellor, Skywalker has long been. Too close, perhaps we feared. Correctly, perhaps we feared. For a heartbeat, Anakin thought resentment would surge. Instead, he heard only weariness. They had feared. He had resisted being feared. None of it had produced trust, and here they all were at the edge of disaster because of it. Windu rose and began to pace, a small, controlled motion that somehow made the chamber feel even more tightly wound. If the Chancellor is cultivating emotional leverage over a Jedi Knight with direct access to both the Council and the Senate, that alone is a concern. If there is more behind it, he stopped. We proceed carefully. Anakin almost laughed. Carefully. Always carefully, until circumstances made carefulness indistinguishable from delay. Yet before impatience could harden, Obi-Wan spoke. Carefully does not mean slowly. Windu gave him a long look. Agreed. That single word changed the air. What followed was not warmth. The Council was not suddenly transformed into a family because a secret had burst in its center. But the conversation became practical, and practicality had a mercy of its own. Shakti would reopen the archive on clone implants in CT 5555 immediately, with full Council authority this time. Obi-Wan would review the sealed executive orders connected to the case. Senate security around Padmé would be reinforced quietly through channels that could not be traced back to Anakin without exposing her. Medical assistance would be arranged through trusted temple healers under the pretext of routine diplomatic support if she consented. And Anakin would go to the opera. Windu delivered that instruction flatly. You will attend. You will hear everything he says. You will report it at once. Anakin met his gaze. No more half-trust then. Windu's expression shifted, not quite into softness, but away from simple severity. No, not today. The acknowledgement unsettled Anakin more than another reprimand would have. It required him to respond in kind. All right? Yoda's hologram inclined its head. Telling us difficult this was. Done it. You have. Anakin let out a breath he had not known he was holding. I didn't do it alone. No, Obi-Wan said beside him. The council meeting ended without ceremony. No formal censure. No exoneration. Discipline had not vanished as a concern. It had simply been postponed beneath a greater danger. Anakin understood that. He even respected it. What he had not expected was the feeling with which he left the chamber. Not absolution. He had not earned that. Not safety. But alignment, perhaps. For the first time in longer than he cared to count, he was no longer standing with one foot in the Order and one foot outside it, while pretending the split did not tear him open. The truth had cost him dignity. It had also returned him something he had thought lost, the possibility that the Jedi might yet behave like guardians instead of magistrates. As he and Obi-Wan walked from the chamber, the first full light of morning spread across Coruscant. The city below flashed gold on towers and silver in the traffic lanes. Obi-Wan did not speak until the doors closed behind them. You handled that well. Anakin gave him a sidelong look. I admitted to secret marriage and prophetic terror in front of half the council. Yes, Obi-Wan said, and resisted the urge to leap across the room at Master Windu. That is what we call growth. Anakin huffed a laugh. Then his expression sobered. Thank you. Obi-Wan's brows lifted slightly, as if the words themselves were rarer than battlefield survival. For what? For standing there? Obi-Wan's answer was quiet enough that only a brother could have heard the depth in it. Always. The galaxy's opera house wore its wealth like ritual. Velvet darkness swallowed sound at the edges. Gold and black surfaces caught the glow from the performance pit below and returned it in muted, luxurious gleams. Private boxes curved along the walls like nested secrets. Patrons arrived draped in silks, military medals, senatorial severity, perfumes that lingered long after bodies passed. Everything in the place suggested refinement elevated to a kind of secular worship. Beauty here was not innocence. It was strategy with a softer voice. Anakin entered through a private corridor under Republic escort and found Palpatine already waiting in the box reserved for the Chancellor. The old man rose with measured pleasure, as if the entire evening existed chiefly to flatter them both. "You came. You invited me." "Ah," Palpatine said with a smile. "But many invited men are suddenly claimed by duty." Anakin took the seat beside him. Below, the performance had already begun. Translucent spheres of light rising and collapsing over the central stage, while musicians hidden somewhere in the architecture drew out tones so low and strange, they seemed to vibrate inside bone. Forms moved within the illuminated veils, dancers or projections or both, telling some myth from a world older than the Republic. Bodies made abstract by light until they seemed like ideas learning to suffer. It was beautiful. He could admit that. The beauty only made the unease sharper. Palpatine folded his hands over his lap. "Tell me, how did the Council receive my appointment?" There was no point pretending ignorance. "As politics." An accurate answer. The Chancellor's eyes remained on the performance. "And yours?" "I haven't decided." "Then you are wiser than most politicians already." The music shifted, became almost human in its grief. One luminous figure descended through a field of dimmer lights while another rose to meet it, and together they circled without touching. Anakin let the image hold him a moment before speaking. "Why do you care whether I'm on the Council?" Palpatine's expression turned thoughtful. "Because institutions become old by forgetting what talent looks like. Because your generation will inherit the Republic my generation has nearly ruined. Because I am tired of watching lesser beings place caution where greatness should stand." The words would once have landed like fuel on a low-burning fire. Tonight they sounded almost naked in their intent. "Greatness," Anakin said. "That's a dangerous word. Only to the mediocre." Anakin turned his head slowly and looked at him. Half the Chancellor's face was lit by the stage glow, the other half in shadow. The arrangement did him no favors. It made his kindness look studied. "Why do you say things like that to me?" Anakin asked. A pause. Then Palpatine smiled faintly. "Because no one else does." That was so accurate it almost hurt. Below them, the performance darkened. The luminous figures fragmented into drifting shards. The music thinned to a single line, high and uncanny. Palpatine leaned closer, his voice lowering to match the secrecy of the box. "Have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?" There it was. Anakin kept his face neutral with an effort he was suddenly grateful to have practiced in council chambers and briefings since boyhood. "No, I thought not." Palpatine's gaze drifted back to the stage. "It's not a story the Jedi would tell you." The line landed now not as an invitation but as a revelation of appetite. He was not simply offering forbidden knowledge. He was defining a boundary and placing himself beyond it, asking Anakin to cross. Palpatine began the tale. He told it as if recounting an old political scandal whose details amused him. An ancient Sith Lord so powerful and so wise he learned to influence the midi-chlorians to create life, to keep those he cared about from dying. A man who became so knowledgeable the only thing he feared was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Killed by his apprentice in his sleep. The irony pleased Palpatine. Anakin could hear it under the measured cadence. Around them, the opera unfolded in corresponding abstractions. Light devouring light, forms birthing themselves from darkness only to dissolve again. The whole room smelled faintly of wine and silk and hidden human ambition. Somewhere across the hall a senator laughed too loudly and then cut himself off. When Palpatine finished, he sat back. Anakin heard his own voice ask, "You know a lot about Sith legends for a public servant." The Chancellor's smile deepened only a fraction. "Does that trouble you?" "It interests me. Interest is the beginning of wisdom. Or a trap." Palpatine turned then, really turned, and the hidden force Anakin had sensed earlier pressed closer to the surface. Not enough for certainty. More than enough for fear. "We are all trapped by something," Palpatine said softly. "Rules. Mortality. The judgments of men less capable than ourselves. The question is whether we accept the trap as natural, simply because it is old." Anakin let silence answer for a moment, buying himself time. The performance pit below exploded into a bloom of cold blue fire that reflected in every polished surface around them. For a heartbeat, the Chancellor's eyes caught that light and looked wrong. Too bright. Too hungry. "You think death is a trap," Anakin said. Palpatine's voice dropped further. "I think power without the courage to use it is a surrender dressed as virtue." There it was. Not the promise yet. Not explicit enough to be named in open accusation. But close. Anakin felt suddenly, vividly, the difference between this moment and the one the Chancellor had intended. If he had come here still isolated, still desperate for secret rescue, the story of Darth Plagueis Eyes would have gone into him like a hook. He could feel the shape of the temptation even now. Save the ones you love. Undo helplessness. Become greater than those who restrained you. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. But Obi-Wan knew. Padmé knew. The Council knew. He was not starving in private anymore. The hook found less purchase. "Is it possible," Anakin asked carefully, "to learn such power?" Palpatine's smile was slow and pleased. "Not from a Jedi." The answer, so famous perhaps in another lifetime, reached Anakin not as wonder but as confirmation. A cold certainty moved down his spine. He did not react outwardly. Years of hiding had made him better at that than most suspected. Instead, he inclined his head as if considering an abstract philosophical point, while every instinct inside him sharpened into a single screaming line. "Report this now." The rest of the performance passed in a haze of light and calculation. Palpatine spoke of art, of the burdens of office, of history's tendency to reward decisive men after first condemning them. Anakin answered when necessary and committed every word to memory. He listened not as a favored protégé, but as a witness. The role felt both alien and liberating. When the final note faded and the audience rose in a hush of expensive fabric, Palpatine touched Anakin's arm. "There are many forms of loyalty," he said. "Remember that." Anakin met his gaze. "I do." Then he bowed and left. He did not return to the temple by the main corridors. Instead, he entered through a private hangar and took the secure route up through maintenance lifts to a small archive room where Obi-Wan and Windu were already waiting, summoned by a coded transmission sent from his speeder. Windu stood with both hands behind his back. Obi-Wan stepped forward the instant the door sealed. "Well," Anakin repeated the conversation nearly word for word. Neither man interrupted until he reached the line not from a Jedi. Windu's face hardened into something close to certainty. Obi-Wan's eyes, for one brief instant, flashed with a fury Anakin rarely saw on him. Not loud fury. Far worse. Cold fury. The kind that distilled itself into precision. "He all but named himself," Obi-Wan said. Windu was silent for several heartbeats. Not enough for public move. Enough for internal readiness. His gaze fixed on Anakin. "From this point forward, you do not meet him alone without alerting us." Anakin crossed his arms. "You think I still want to?" "That isn't what I think," Windu said. "I think he believes he can still turn you." The bluntness stung because it carried no malice, only fact. Anakin looked away. Maybe he could have. Neither Obi-Wan nor Windu spoke immediately. At last, Obi-Wan said, very quietly, but he didn't. Anakin closed his eyes once. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw the opera lights again, and behind them the dream chamber, Padmé pale and fading. The temptation had not vanished. Fear had not vanished. But the path between fear and surrender had narrowed. When he opened his eyes, Windu was already issuing new instructions. Shakti would be brought in at once. Temple healers would be placed on discreet standby. If the Chancellor pushed further, they would be ready. Ready for what? None of them yet said aloud. The night outside deepened over Coruscant, and somewhere in the city the man who called himself Chancellor was almost certainly smiling. War did not pause because men discovered treachery at the heart of government. By the next afternoon, General Grievous had been located on Utapau, and the temple moved with the brutal efficiency of a machine that had learned too well how to respond to opportunity. Briefings multiplied. Clone commanders arrived and departed under escort. Navigational projections filled the strategy rooms in layered blue stacks. Somewhere in the middle of that, between revelations that should have rewritten the whole shape of the conflict, the war still demanded its ordinary sacrifices of time, sleep, and attention. Obi-Wan was the obvious choice to pursue Grievous. Everyone knew it, which did nothing to make Anakin like it. They stood in a side hangar as technicians swarmed over a gunship already prepped for departure. The air throbbed with engine tests and the clatter of loading equipment. Clone pilots moved in practiced rhythms, faces set in that efficient pre-battle calm Anakin had learned to recognize as courage's plainest expression. Across the deck, Commander Cody was speaking with an ordnance officer, one gloved hand marking items off a datapad. Obi-Wan adjusted the clasp at his shoulder and seemed absurdly composed, given the fact that the Republic might, at this very moment, be controlled by a Sith Lord who believed Anakin could be converted into an instrument. "You still think they should send me?" Anakin said. Obi-Wan gave him a sidelong look. "No, Dot. I think you want to go because it would be simpler to fight something with a visible number of arms." "Meh, Padmé." Anakin watched a loader droid pass between them carrying sealed ammunition crates. "I could kill Grievous." "I know." "Then why?" "Because the Chancellor asked for you to remain on Coruscant." Obi-Wan fastened his utility belt and faced him fully. "And because if we intend to uncover what he is before he acts, then he cannot be allowed to think his influence over you has failed." Anakin hated that Obi-Wan was right. "You make it sound as if I'm bait." Obi-Wan's expression softened. "No, Daddy, no. I make it sound as if you're important." "Nah. That's not better." It wasn't meant to be. For a moment, the noise of the hangar receded behind the far more intimate pressure of impending separation. They had fought in different sectors countless times during the war, but this felt different because the danger at their backs was no longer strategic. It had a face. Or almost had one. And if the last 24 hours had taught Anakin anything, it was how much easier it was to breathe with Obi-Wan in the room. "Shocked he found something else," Anakin said. Obi-Wan's jaw tightened slightly. "About the chips?" Anakin nodded. Kamino's original medical notation calls them behavioral modification biochips. The public file calls them inhibitor safeguards for aggression control. The versions don't match. Convenient. Fives wasn't mad. I'm increasingly certain he wasn't. Anakin looked past Obi-Wan toward Cody and the others. The clones moved under bright deck lights, loyal and precise, and utterly unaware of the shadow that might already be written into their bodies. Rage flashed through him, hot, clean, and not at all useful. He tamped it down. "If Palpatine can trigger something in them, then we move before he does," Obi-Wan said. "That is why you stay." There was no arguing with the logic, only with the fear under it. A chime sounded from Anakin's comlink, a secure temple signal. He checked it and found a message from Padmé requesting a meeting at once through one of their safer channels. His pulse kicked. Obi-Wan noticed at once. "Yes. Go." Anakin hesitated. "And you?" "I am apparently to fly into a sinkhole world and destroy a mechanical nightmare before supper." Obi-Wan's mouth twitched. "Routine." Despite everything, Anakin smiled. The smile vanished when Obi-Wan stepped forward and, in full view of the hangar and several highly observant clones, pulled him into a brief, hard embrace. It was the last thing Anakin expected. Obi-Wan let go almost at once, but the impact of it stayed. "No more secrets," he said quietly. "From either of us." "Precisely." Anakin nodded. "Come back." Obi-Wan's expression turned wry and warm and painfully dear. "I usually do." Then he was gone, striding toward the gunship with Cody at his shoulder, cloak moving in the wind kicked up by engine wash. Anakin watched until the ramp sealed and the vessel lifted, shrinking into the layered sky lanes until it became only another moving light over Coruscant. He took a speeder to Padmé's apartment by a route so indirect it would have made a paranoid smuggler proud. She was waiting in her private study, not the dining room this time. The chamber was lined with shelves of old Naboo texts and Senate archives, their leather and glossed metal spines making the room feel more grounded than the rest of the apartment. A hollow projector hovered over her desk displaying a list of names. Senators aligned with the petition to reduce emergency powers. Bail Organa's was near the top. "You look as if you haven't slept," she said when he entered. "I could say the same to you. I'm not the one who thinks he can survive on stubbornness and momentum." "Not survive," Anakin said. "Function," Padmé snorted softly, then sobered. "Bail heard something this morning. One of Palpatine's aides has been sounding out members of the Senate Guard for direct loyalty assignments to the Chancellor's office. Not the office of the Republic, him." Anakin's hands curled. "He's preparing for something." "Yes." She moved to him quickly. "And if he suspects the delegation will oppose him, he may move sooner." He told her about the opera, about the tale of Darth Plagueis. He did not try to soften the implication. Padmé listened with widening eyes and growing horror that she contained only through force of will. "When you first met him," she said at last, "you were a child." Anakin nodded. "And he's been shaping you ever since." The simplicity of that statement made him feel briefly ill. Not because he had never considered it, but because hearing it from her stripped away the last sentimental excuses. Palpatine's kindness, his praise, his interest, all could still have contained genuine feeling. That was what made the manipulation monstrous. It did not need to be false to be exploitative. Padmé took both his hands. "Listen to me. If this becomes public before the Council is ready, the Senate will splinter. Some will defend him no matter what he is." "Nah. Oh, I know. So if there is a move against him, it has to be clean." He almost laughed at the impossibility. Nothing in politics or war was ever clean. Yet her instinct was right. If they struck too early and failed, Palpatine would have every excuse he needed to make the Jedi look like conspirators. If they waited too long, he might spring whatever was hidden in the clone army and bury the Order in a single coordinated act. "We're trying to confirm enough," he said. "Trying may not be faster than he is." The words stung because they echoed her earlier command, "Try faster." He rested his forehead against hers. "Obi-Wan left for Utapau." She closed her eyes briefly. "Then be careful. Always." "No," Padmé whispered, and opened her eyes. "Not always. That's the point." He breathed out a laugh in spite of himself, and for a moment they simply held each other in the middle of a city built on ambition, while the Republic tilted closer to the edge. When he returned to the temple that night, Shakti met him outside the secure archive vault. Her face, usually controlled to the point of stillness, was tight with urgency. "We found a fragment in the medical logs tied to CT-55555 seizure," she said without preamble. "A command architecture buried in the inhibitor schema. Most of it's encrypted beyond my clearance, but one string survived the scrub." Anakin's skin went cold. "What string?" Shakti held his gaze. "Execute Order 66. The corridors seemed to narrow around them." "Do you know what it means?" he asked. "No." She did not look away. "But I know a contingency order when I see one. And I know this one is hidden more deeply than any legitimate command protocol should be." "No." Anakin thought of Cody in the hangar, of Rex laughing over a tactical map dot, of every clone who had trusted him because trust was the only way to survive war. A hidden command, deep enough to escape review, protected by executive intervention. Palpatine died. Always Palpatine. "What have you told Windu?" "Everything." "Good." Anakin's voice had gone flat with fury. "Then we stop this before anyone gives the order." Shakti's Lekka shifted with grim assent. "That is now the Council's intention." For the first time since the dream began, Anakin believed intention might become action in time. For the first time, he also understood how little time they probably had left. Near midnight, he went back to the council chamber alone. No one had summoned him. Windu and the others were in secure conference with temple security and the handful of masters still on Coruscant. Shakti had taken the cloned medical data to a sealed analysis lab. Messengers ran between towers carrying orders dressed in routine language. Beneath the visible calm of the temple, readiness was coiling. Anakin needed height. Space. Somewhere the noise of everyone else's urgency might stop long enough for him to hear his own mind. The chamber was dark except for the city beyond its windows and a few low lamps left burning along the walls. Storm clouds had returned over Coruscant. Lightning flared deep within them, muting and brightening the skyline in irregular pulses. The great empty chairs ringed the room like witnesses from another age. He stood in the center with Padmé's holomage active in one hand. It was a small recording, one he had kept for months and watched less often than he wanted because wanting itself was dangerous. Padmé sat in the sunlight on Naboo in the image, laughing at something the recorder had not captured, one hand brushing loose hair from her face. No politics, no strategy, no fear. Just the person beneath all the masks. The sight of her struck deeper now than it had when he made the recording. Perhaps because he had so nearly lost the right to look at it honestly. He closed the holo and stared out into the storm. The dream came without warning. Not sleep, not a trance. A ripping shift in perception so abrupt the chamber vanished, and another reality opened over it like light through cracked metal. Padmé was there again in the white room, but this time he saw more. 2 infants crying. Yes, twin cries. Distinct, insistent, alive. Medical droids whirring uselessly at the edges. Obi-Wan in the doorway, reaching toward him but too far away. Yoda behind a veil of light. And in the center of everything, not death itself, but a shadow bending over the bed. Not inevitable. Not natural. Intentional. The shadow turned. Palpatine. Not in senatorial robes. In black so deep it seemed to drink the light around him. His face folded not with age but with corruption. The kindly mask burned off. Yellow eyes. That terrible patient smile at last revealed. Anakin jolted back into the chamber with a gasp, one hand gripping empty air where a lightsaber was not. Thunder rolled over the temple. For a few seconds he could do nothing but breathe. The vision's force left his muscles shaking. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the surge of battle instinct, and the nauseating recognition of the face in the shadows, something else settled with surprising clarity. The dream had changed. Or perhaps he had. Before, the future had appeared as fate, Padmé dying because loss was what the Force had chosen to show him. Now the shape was different. The danger was not simply death waiting at the end of time. It was intervention. Corruption. A hand reaching through his fear to arrange the very outcome he dreaded. The vision had not become merciful. It had become intelligible. He was still kneeling when the chamber doors opened. Windu entered first, cloak damp at the hem from crossing exposed walkways between towers. Behind him came Kit Fisto and 2 temple guards, then Shakti with a datapad clutched hard enough to whiten the edges of her fingers. They all stopped when they saw Anakin on the floor. Windu's eyes narrowed. What happened? Anakin rose. I saw him. Palpatine? He's the shadow in the vision. The words came with a certainty he no longer cared to disguise. He's behind it. Windu studied him as if weighing not only the statement but the state in which it had been made. A vision is not evidence. No, Anakin said. But the opera is. The chip record is. The sealed investigations are. The way he's moved through every fracture in the Republic is. How much more do you need before you admit what he is? Lightning flashed across the chamber windows, outlining everyone in white for a heartbeat. Windu stepped closer. Calm yourself. Anakin laughed once, incredulous and joyless. You still think calm is the issue. Sometimes it is. And sometimes, Anakin snapped. Waiting for perfect certainty is just fear with better manners. The guards shifted. Kit Fisto's gaze sharpened. Shakti went very still. Then Windu said the last thing Anakin expected. Yes? The admission stopped him. Windu's face remained stern but not closed. Sometimes it is, he repeated, and sometimes it costs lives. I know the difference. The fury in Anakin stalled, leaving behind something rawer. Windu continued. Master Kenobi has engaged Grievous on Utapau. If he succeeds, the war's military pretext weakens overnight. The Chancellor will know that. Combined with what we have learned tonight, it means he may accelerate whatever contingency he has built into the clone army. We move before dawn. No. The chamber's air seemed to sharpen. Kit Fisto folded his arms. Direct arrest. If possible, Windu said. Containment first. Exposure second. If he is what we suspect, there may be no clean version of this. Anakin's pulse hammered. I'm coming with you. No. The refusal hit like a slap. No? Windu held his ground. If he has focused this long on you, then your presence may be exactly what he wants. He won't expect me against him. Or he will. Either way, I will not deliver you into the center of his plan without necessity. Now, I'm not a child. I am aware. Then stop ordering me like one. The old rhythm flared between them almost of its own accord, and for one terrible heartbeat Anakin felt the trap hidden inside it. This was how Palpatine would want the moment to go. Frustration, exclusion, injury sharpened into pride. Pride into reckless need to prove himself indispensable. The dark side did not always begin with murder. Sometimes it began with the refusal to bear being distrusted. He saw it. Actually saw it, as clearly as he had seen the shadow over Padmé's bed. And because he saw it, he could step aside. Anakin shut his eyes, forced one breath in, one out. When he opened them again, his voice was rough but controlled. Then give me another use. Windu watched him. Something unreadable passed through the older man's face and was gone. Stay close to the temple. If the Chancellor contacts you, stall him and inform me at once. If the clone contingencies activate, you coordinate evacuation routes for the younglings and healers. Master Fisto will leave you command access. It was not the role Anakin wanted. It was in fact the role his pride hated most. Defensive, protective, secondary to the main strike. Which was precisely why accepting it felt like choosing the light with both hands. All right, he said. Shakti looked at him then with something close to relief. Kit Fisto offered the barest nod. Windu studied him one moment longer, then inclined his head once in return. Not deference, but recognition. The comlink at Anakin's belt chimed. Every person in the chamber went still. He looked down at the display. Executive frequency. Palpatine. Thunder rolled again above the city. Windu's eyes locked on his. Answer. Anakin touched the control. A blue image sprang to life over his palm. The Chancellor seated in darkness, face calm, hands folded. Anakin, Palpatine said as if calling on a favored son. I must speak with you at once. There are matters of great importance concerning the future of the Republic, and the life of Senator Amidala. The chamber vanished in Anakin's mind. There was only the whole image, the old man's soft voice, and the terrible exhilaration of realizing the moment had finally arrived. He lifted his gaze to Windu. No more secrets, Obi-Wan had said. No more. Anakin answered without hesitation. I'm on my way, Chancellor. Then he cut the channel and turned to the waiting masters, as stormlight flashed over Coruscant, and the last path back to darkness quietly, irrevocably closed. For the first time in his life, when power called to his fear by name, Anakin Skywalker did not go to it alone.